What happens when a man with a little power tries to crush a spirit bigger than he can imagine? You're about to find out. This isn't just a story about a ruined sketchbook. It's about a soul torn apart by prejudice and bureaucracy. It's about a black artist named Samuel Hayes, whose dreams were dissolved in a chemical spill of hate by a TSA Agent Robert Thompson. But what that agent didn't know was that the very art he tried to erase would be resurrected 10 feet tall in the one place he could never escape. Stay with us as we uncover how a single act of malice led to a devastating public reckoning captured live for the entire world to see. The soul of Samuel Hayes lived between the worn, leather-bound covers of a sketchbook. It wasn't just paper and graphite. It was a living archive of his existence. Within its pages, the proud, wrinkled face of his grandmother Clarice smiled with a warmth that could chase away the chill of a Baltimore winter. The stoop-shouldered silhouette of Mr. Henderson's corner store stood as a silent witness to a generation of neighborhood stories. Fantastical creatures born from the fusion of jazz notes and late-night anxieties danced across the vellum. This sketchbook was Samuel's external hard drive, his therapist, his most honest historian. And it was the reason he was standing in the sterile, soul-leeching purgatory of the BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport security line on a Tuesday morning in October. Samuel was 28, and for most of those years, he'd felt like a ghost haunting the edges of the art world. He had a talent that was undeniable, a raw kinetic energy in his lines that could make a simple portrait feel like a symphony. But talent didn't pay the rent on his cramped row-house apartment, nor did it quiet the gnawing insecurity that came with every rejection letter. He worked 2 part-time jobs, one stocking shelves at a grocery store, the other washing dishes to fuel his real work. The work he did under the glow of a single bare bulb in his small studio space. This trip, however, felt different. He was flying to Los Angeles to compete in the prestigious Atherton Grant competition. Securing it meant $50,000 and a solo exhibition at a renowned gallery. It was more than a lifeline. It was a coronation. His application, a series of stunning digital prints of his sketchbook's best pages, had miraculously pushed him into the final round. The sketchbook itself, the source of his magic, was nestled carefully in his carry-on, its familiar weight a comforting pressure against his back. 2 lines over another man stood in a different kind of purgatory. TSA Agent Robert Thompson was 45, and the world had long since curdled in his gut. He had wanted to be a state trooper, a man of action and respect. Instead, a knee injury in his 20s had relegated him to this world of bins belts and bored travelers. His life was a series of monotonous procedures, a slow-motion drowning in a sea of beige uniforms and recirculated air. Over the years, his disappointment had festered into a quiet, simmering resentment, a prejudice that wasn't loud or overt, but seeped out in the small ways he wielded his minor authority. He saw threats where there were none, suspicion in the faces of those who didn't look like him, and a personal affront in any deviation from his rigid, self-imposed order. He watched passengers with a detached contempt, the hurried businessman barking into his phone, the giggling college students on their way to Cancun, the frazzled mother trying to collapse a stroller. They were all just cogs in the machine that was his daily drudgery. He performed his duties with a practiced, almost robotic efficiency, his voice, a flat monotone that invited no argument. Laptops out, belts off, no liquids over 3.4 ounces. These were the commandments of his small kingdom. As Samuel finally reached the front of the line, he placed his worn backpack and shoes into a grey bin. He offered a polite, nervous smile to the agent directing traffic. He just wanted this part to be over. The airport was a necessary evil, a non-place he had to endure to get to his dream. The bin slid down the rollers and disappeared into the X-ray machine. On the other side, Agent Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly. He saw the dense rectangular shape in the backpack. He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. He let the bag pass, but as Samuel came through the body scanner without incident, Thompson raised a single peremptory finger. "You, step aside. We're gonna need to do an additional search on that bag." The words, flat and impersonal, landed like a stone in Samuel's stomach. A familiar dread, the cold companion of so many black men in America, prickled at the back of his neck. He nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral, and watched as another agent pulled his backpack from the conveyor belt and placed it on a stainless steel table. Agent Thompson walked over, snapping on a pair of blue latex gloves. The squeak of the latex seemed to echo in the cavernous space. "Anything sharp? Anything I should know about?" Thompson asked, his eyes not on Samuel, but on the bag. "No, sir. Just my clothes and my sketchbook." Samuel replied, his voice tighter than he wanted. Thompson unzipped the main compartment with a rough tug. He rummaged through the neatly folded clothes with an invasive carelessness, his gloved fingers probing and pressing. He pulled out the sketchbook. It was bound in dark brown leather, the edges softened with years of use, a simple elastic band holding it closed. It looked less like an artist's tool and more like an ancient diary. Thompson held it as if it were a contaminated object. "What's this?" "It's my sketchbook," Samuel said, taking a half step forward before catching himself. "It's my artwork. I'm an artist." Thompson's lips tightened into a semblance of a sneer. "An artist," he repeated the words, dripping with disbelief. He slipped off the elastic band and began to flip through the pages. His movements were not those of someone appreciating art, but of someone searching for contraband. He flicked past the loving portrait of Clarice, lingered for a moment on a detailed rendering of a Baltimore street corner, his expression hardening. He saw sketches of young black men, friends of Samuel, captured in moments of joy and contemplation. To Samuel, these were portraits of his world. To Thompson, they looked like something else. His mind, conditioned by a diet of cable news and unspoken biases, saw not community but a gang. He saw not art, but a coded language of threat. "What are these?" Thompson demanded, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a more accusatorial edge. He tapped a gloved finger on a sketch of Samuel's cousin Leo, who had a small tattoo of a star on his neck. "Gang signs. What's this supposed to be?" The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Samuel felt a surge of hot anger, but he swallowed it down, knowing that any display of emotion would only be used against him. "That's my cousin," Samuel said, his voice trembling slightly. It's just art. It's my life. Please be careful with it. It's very important to me." The plea for care seemed to trigger something in Thompson. It was the assertion of value, the claim that this object, and by extension its owner, mattered. It was a direct challenge to the agent's small temporary dominion. He saw it as arrogance. "Everything that comes through this checkpoint is subject to search, sir," Thompson said, drawing out the last word with mocking formality. "And I'll be as careful as I need to be to ensure the safety of the other passengers." He held the book open with one hand and continued his rough, dismissive search of the backpack with the other. He pulled out a small, travel-sized bottle of ink and a fountain pen. He held them up. "Can't have this." Over the limit, he said, even though the bottle was clearly under the 3.4-ounce threshold. Before Samuel could protest, Thompson unscrewed the cap, and with a movement that was too quick to be accidental, yet too casual to be overtly malicious, tilted his hand. The world seemed to slow down. A thick, viscous stream of permanent black ink poured from the bottle. It didn't spill on the sterile steel table or the concrete floor. It cascaded directly onto the open pages of Samuel's sketchbook. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then the horrific alchemy began. The ink, a deep and vibrant obsidian, hit the delicate paper and exploded. It bled outwards in a chaotic spider-webbing stain, devouring the fine, precise lines of graphite. The portrait of his grandmother. Her warm smile was the first to go. The ink filled her eyes, dripped from her chin like a black tear, and then obliterated her face entirely, turning it into a monstrous, shapeless void. The page buckled and warped the paper's fibers, surrendering to the corrosive liquid. Thompson had turned his masterpiece into a nightmare. He had not just destroyed a drawing, he had desecrated a memory. He had violated a soul. A sound escaped Samuel's lips, a strangled, guttural cry of pure anguish that was torn from the deepest part of him. It was the sound of something inside him, breaking. He lunged forward, his hands outstretched, a desperate, instinctual move to save the last piece of his grandmother he had. No. What did you do? Two other TSA agents immediately moved in, grabbing his arms. Their grips were firm, impersonal. Sir, calm down. Step back. But Samuel couldn't calm down. He was staring at the ruin of his life's work. The ink was still spreading a malevolent tide, consuming page after page. He could see it seeping through, staining the edges of the pages beneath a dark promise of further destruction. The detailed streetscape, the fantastical beasts, all were being swallowed by the spreading black stain. Agent Thompson looked down at the mess he had created, his face a mask of feigned surprise. Whoops, he said the word, a flippant insult. He dropped the now empty ink bottle onto the table. Volatile liquid. Had to be tested. Looks like it wasn't stable. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, that it momentarily stunned Samuel into silence. Tested. You poured it. You poured it all over my work. His voice cracked, the raw pain echoing in the vast, impersonal space of the security checkpoint. A few passengers in the still-moving line turned to look. They saw a distraught black man being restrained by security and a TSA agent standing over a soiled book. Most saw a problem, a delay, and quickly looked away, eager to not get involved. A young woman with pink hair winced in sympathy, her hand flying to her mouth. An older man in a business suit just sighed, checked his watch, and shuffled forward. Sir, you're causing a disturbance, one of the agents holding him said, his voice low and threatening. He destroyed my property. He did it on purpose, Samuel insisted. His eyes still locked on the grotesque, still wet stain. Thompson, now fully committed to his narrative, adopted a defensive posture. I was following protocol, sir. The liquid was unlabeled and potentially hazardous. The spillage was an accident that occurred during the screening process. He was reciting from a mental script, his words devoid of any genuine remorse. He gestured for a supervisor, a man with a weary, perpetually annoyed expression and a name tag that read D. Sterling, ambled over. David Sterling had been a TSA supervisor for a decade and had seen every kind of passenger meltdown imaginable. His default setting was to de-escalate by siding with his agents. "What's the problem here?" Sterling asked, his eyes sweeping over the scene with disinterest. Thompson explained his version of events, painting himself as the diligent agent and Samuel as a non-compliant emotional passenger. "The passenger became agitated when I initiated a standard bag search. During the inspection of a prohibited oversized liquid, the contents spilled onto his personal effects." "It was a travel-sized bottle. It wasn't prohibited," Samuel protested, struggling against the agent's grip. "He's lying. Look at it." Sterling glanced at the ruined sketchbook, his expression unchanging. He saw a mess, not a masterpiece. He saw an inconvenience, not an act of cultural vandalism. To him, it was just damaged property, a liability to be managed. "TSA has protocols for damaged items," Sterling said, his voice as sterile as the floor. "You can file a claim. There's a form online." He turned to Samuel, his eyes cold and dismissive. "Right now, you need to collect your belongings and move along, or we will have you escorted from the airport for causing a disturbance." The finality in his voice was like a physical blow. There would be no justice here. There would be no acknowledgement of the truth. There was only the unyielding wall of bureaucracy and the implicit threat of force. The agents released Samuel. He felt suddenly weak, his legs unsteady. He stumbled towards the table. With trembling hands, he picked up the sodden, ruined sketchbook. The pages were fused together in a pulpy mass. The weight of it felt wrong, heavier, bloated with the ink that had murdered his art. He clutched it to his chest, a sob finally breaking free. It was a raw, heart-breaking sound of utter and complete devastation. He gathered the rest of his things, his movements robotic. He didn't look at Thompson or Sterling. He couldn't. The contempt in their eyes was more than he could bear. He walked away from the security checkpoint, the ruined book held against him like a dead child. He found a deserted corner near a gate, sank into a hard plastic chair, and finally let the full weight of what had happened crash down upon him. He had missed his flight. He had missed the competition. The LA dream had evaporated in a pool of black ink. But it was more than that. Thompson hadn't just destroyed paper. He had destroyed Samuel's confidence, his faith in his own talent. The sketchbook was his sanctuary, the place where he was most powerful, most himself. And it had been violated casually and cruelly by a man who saw no value in it, no value in him. He stayed in that chair for hours long after his scheduled flight had departed. He mechanically went online on his phone and found the TSA claim form. It was a cold, impersonal web page asking for item descriptions and monetary value. How could he put a price on his grandmother's smile? How could he quantify the cost of a decade of his life's work? He filled it out anyway, his words a hollow echo of his rage and grief. Weeks turned into a month. Samuel was adrift. He'd returned to his Baltimore apartment, the silence of his studio now a deafening roar. The smell of turpentine and graphite, once a comfort, now seemed to mock him. He couldn't bring himself to draw. Every time he picked up a pencil, the image of the ink spreading, consuming would flash in his mind. He was paralyzed. The official response from the TSA finally arrived in his inbox. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic non-apology. An internal investigation has been conducted. Agent Thompson acted in accordance with established security protocols. While the damage to your property is regrettable, the investigation found no evidence of misconduct. The spillage was determined to be unintentional. Your claim is denied. The words were a final clinical twist of the knife. It was official. The destruction of his soul was regrettable, but unintentional. He was nothing. His art was nothing. He hit rock bottom. The part-time jobs became his whole life. The spark in his eyes dimmed. He started avoiding his friends, ashamed of his own despair. The ruined sketchbook sat on his desk, wrapped in a plastic bag, a constant decaying reminder of his humiliation. One evening there was a knock on his door. He ignored it. It came again, more insistent. With a heavy sigh, he opened it to find a woman he didn't know. She was in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "Samuel Hayes?" she asked. "Yeah, my name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a reporter for the Baltimore Chronicle." She held up a small press pass. "I heard about what happened to you at BWI. A friend of a friend was on a flight that day and mentioned a commotion. I've been digging into TSA complaints. Your story. It stood out." Samuel stared at her, suspicious and weary. "They already investigated. It's over. They said he did nothing wrong." "I don't believe them," Sarah said simply. "I've seen the number of complaints against that specific airport and the number that get dismissed. It's a pattern. May I come in? I just want to hear your side of the story. I want to see the sketchbook." Something in her direct, no-nonsense demeanor broke through his apathy. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of something other than despair sparked within him. He hesitated, then stepped aside and let her in. He led her to his studio, the air thick with the dust of disuse. He unwrapped the ruined sketchbook and laid it on the table. It was even worse now that it was dry. The pages were stiff and brittle, warped into grotesque shapes. The black stain was absolute, a scar that had scarred the pages beneath. Sarah Jenkins looked at it, her professional composure cracking for a moment. She saw the ghost of a face, the hint of a building, the phantom limb of a creature, all consumed by the ugly, chaotic blackness. She didn't see damaged property. She saw a hate crime against art. "My God," she whispered. She looked at Samuel at the profound, bone-deep sadness in his eyes. "Tell me everything." And so he did. He poured out the whole story, the words tumbling out, filled with the frustration and pain he had suppressed for weeks. Sarah listened intently, taking notes, her expression growing more determined with every word. She wrote a story. It wasn't a front-page exposé. It was a small but powerful piece for the Chronicle's online arts and culture section. It was titled "An Artist's Soul Destroyed by Protocol." The article didn't go viral, but it was shared within the local arts community. It was a small stone dropped into a vast, silent pond. But it was about to create a ripple that no one, least of all Agent Robert Thompson, could ever have anticipated. The wheels of progress turn slowly, but sometimes they grind in unexpected directions. While Samuel was wrestling with his demons in Baltimore, the Port Authority overseeing BWI Airport was deep into a multi-million-dollar renovation of its main domestic terminal. The project was a typical flurry of construction dust, rerouted passenger flow, and budget meetings. A key feature of the new design was a massive 40-foot-long wall that greeted every passenger immediately after they cleared the security checkpoint. Eleanor Vance, the newly appointed Director of Public Arts for the airport, saw this wall not as a blank space, but as a canvas. Eleanor was a force of nature, a woman in her late 50s with a shock of silver hair and a passionate belief that art was not a luxury, but a public necessity. She wanted a statement piece, something that would give the sterile, transient space a heart and a soul. Her vision was for a mural created by a local Maryland artist, a piece that would scream, "Welcome to Baltimore! This is who we are!" Her assistant, a young tech-savvy art history graduate named Ben, was tasked with scouting for potential artists. He trawled through dozens of local gallery websites, artist portfolios, and Instagram feeds. It was during a late-night search, deep down a rabbit hole of Baltimore news links, that he stumbled upon Sarah Jenkins's article in the Chronicle's archive. He read the headline, "An Artist's Soul Destroyed by Protocol." He clicked. He read the story of Samuel Hayes, of the sketchbook of the casual cruelty that had unfolded in the very terminal they were now renovating. He saw the accompanying photo, a picture Sarah had taken of Samuel, holding the warped, ink-stained book, his face a portrait of profound grief. Then Ben clicked the link in the article to Samuel's online portfolio. He was stunned. The digital images salvaged from the now-destroyed originals were breathtaking. The raw emotion, the technical skill, the vibrant life captured in every line, it was exactly the kind of voice Eleanor was looking for. He saw the story not just as a tragedy, but as an opportunity for a powerful, redemptive narrative. He brought the article to Eleanor the next morning. "I think I found our artist," he said, placing his tablet on her desk. Eleanor read the article in silence, her expression hardening. She looked at the photo of Samuel, then swiped through his portfolio. A slow, determined smile spread across her face. The irony was almost poetic. It was perfect. "Get him on the phone," she said. "This is more than a commission. This is a resurrection." When Eleanor Vance called, Samuel was sure it was a prank. He was on his lunch break from the grocery store, sitting in his car, and the voice on the other end of the line was talking about a mural, the airport, a commission. It felt like a cruel, elaborate joke. "Look, I don't know who this is, but it's not funny," he said, his voice flat. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Eleanor Vance," the voice insisted, patient but firm. "I am the Director of Public Arts for the BWI Airport Authority. I read the article about you in the Baltimore Chronicle. I've also seen your portfolio. Your work is extraordinary. And your story. It moved me deeply." Samuel was silent, trying to process the cognitive dissonance. The airport, the scene of his deepest humiliation, was calling to offer him the biggest opportunity of his life. "We have a 40-foot wall in the new terminal," Eleanor continued. "It's the first thing people will see after they clear security. I want you to paint it. The theme is Baltimore's soul, resilience, and rebirth. I can't think of anyone better suited to bring that to life than you. We have a budget of $75,000. $75,000. The number hung in the air, seeming to warp the reality around him. It was more money than he had ever seen in his life. It was freedom. It was a future. "Why?" Samuel asked, the single word carrying the weight of all his suspicion and pain. "Is this some kind of PR stunt to make up for what your guy did?" "Let me be very clear, Mr. Hayes," Eleanor said, her tone sharpening with sincerity. "I don't care about the TSA's They are a federal agency. We are the Port Authority. What happened to you was an injustice. I am offering you this commission because you are a brilliant artist, and because your story embodies the very theme of the mural. This isn't about covering something up. It's about bringing something powerful to light. It's about giving you the biggest canvas we have to answer the ugliness you experienced." There was one more thing. "For this to have the maximum impact," Eleanor explained, "we need to keep your involvement a secret until the day of the unveiling. We'll announce that a local artist was chosen, but we won't reveal your name. We want the mural and your story to be revealed at the same time." The audacity of it, the sheer poetic justice, was staggering. To create his masterpiece in secret, right under the noses of the people who had wronged him, and to have it unveiled as a monument to his own resilience. The idea sent a jolt through his veins, the first true spark of creative fire he had felt in months. He said, "Yes." The next few months were a blur of frenetic, clandestine creation. The airport authority gave him access to an empty hangar on the far side of the airfield. Every night after his shift, Samuel would drive to the hangar, the vast, echoing space, his private sanctuary. They had constructed a massive canvas, the size of a billboard, sectioned into panels. For the first week, he just stared at the terrifying expanse of white. The old fear, the ghost of the ink stain, still haunted him. But then he thought of Eleanor's words. "This is your answer." He took out the ruined sketchbook, the talisman of his pain, and laid it on a table. He would not hide from the wound. He would transform it. He began to sketch his movements, hesitant at first, then gaining confidence. He decided not to simply recreate his old drawings, but to build upon them, to imbue them with the fire of his experience. He would paint his grandmother's face not just as a loving portrait, but as a towering icon of strength and endurance, her eyes filled with a wisdom that had seen it all. He would paint the scenes of his neighborhood not as static moments, but as a vibrant, living tapestry of community and defiance. He channeled all his pain, his anger, his grief, and his stubborn, unyielding hope onto that canvas. He worked with a furious energy paint, flecking his clothes and face. He incorporated ghostly, faded echoes of the destroyed sketches into the background, as if their spirits were woven into the fabric of the new creation. The central image was his grandmother, Clarice, her face 10 feet high, her expression one of serene, unbreakable power. At the bottom, subtly worked into the folds of a painted curtain, was a single iconic image, a leather-bound book stained with a single dark blot of ink. It was a scar worn now as a badge of honor. As the mural neared completion, Samuel felt a transformation within himself. The act of creating on such a grand scale, of turning his deepest wound into a source of immense power, was healing him. The ghost of Agent Thompson no longer had power over him. Samuel was building a monument that would long outlast the memory of one man's petty hatred. He was taking back his story one brushstroke at a time, and soon the whole world would see it. The day of the unveiling was a crisp, bright morning in late April. A temporary stage and a podium had been erected in the newly renovated terminal, directly in front of a massive wall, shrouded by a heavy dark blue curtain. The air buzzed with the manufactured excitement of a public relations event. A small crowd had gathered, local dignitaries, airport officials, members of the Arts Commission, and a handful of news crews, including a team from the local affiliate WBAL-TV. Among the uniformed personnel providing security for the event was Agent Robert Thompson. For him, this was just another tedious assignment, a break from the monotony of the checkpoint. He stood near the back, arms crossed his face, set in its usual expression of bored indifference. The incident with the artist months ago was a distant memory, a minor blip that had been smoothly handled and officially forgotten. His supervisor, David Sterling, had given him a verbal slap on the wrist for not handling the spillage more discreetly, but the official report had cleared him completely. Thompson felt a smug sense of vindication. He had been right, and the system had backed him up. Sterling was also in attendance, schmoozing near the front. He saw the mural unveiling as a positive PR opportunity for the airport, a way to signal a new modern BWI. He had no idea who the artist was, only that they were local, a detail he found charmingly provincial. The ceremony began. Eleanor Vance, radiating pride, stepped up to the podium. "Welcome everyone to a new day at BWI," she began, her voice resonating through the terminal. "Today we are not just unveiling a piece of art. We are unveiling a statement. A statement about who we are as a city, as a community. We wanted a piece that spoke to the soul of Baltimore, a piece that embodied the themes of resilience, of rebirth, of the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity. Thompson shifted his weight, suppressing a yawn. The word resilience meant nothing to him. We launched a quiet search for an artist who could speak that truth. Eleanor continued, her eyes scanning the crowd. And we found one whose own journey is a testament to the very theme of this mural, an artist who found a home for their work in the most unexpected and perhaps the most poignant of places. A palpable sense of anticipation filled the air. With a theatrical flourish, Eleanor nodded to the side. It is my profound honor to present to you Baltimore's Soul by Samuel Hayes. The curtain began to slide away. As the name Samuel Hayes was spoken, a flicker of recognition too faint to be called a memory sparked in the back of Thompson's mind. The name was vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. He watched unimpressed as the curtain fell away. And then the art was revealed. It was an explosion of color and life, a breathtaking symphony of faces, streets, and dreams. The scale of it was overwhelming. It pulsed with an energy that seemed to push back against the sterile architecture of the terminal. And there, in the center, dominating the entire composition, was the face of a woman. A black woman, her face etched with the lines of a long, loving life, her eyes holding a universe of wisdom and strength. Thompson's bored indifference shattered. He stared at the woman's face, and a cold dread, slick and oily, began to crawl up his spine. He knew that face. He had seen it before. A young man walked onto the stage from the wings to thunderous applause. He was tall, dressed simply, his eyes shining with an emotion that was equal parts triumph and unspeakable pain. It was him, the artist from months ago, the owner of the sketchbook. The blood drained from Thompson's face. The terminal around him seemed to warp and recede. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. It couldn't be. Samuel stepped up to the podium, his gaze sweeping across the stunned and appreciative faces. And then his eyes found Agent Thompson. For a single searing moment, their gazes locked across the crowd. In Samuel's eyes, Thompson saw no hatred, no anger. He saw something far worse, pity. Then Samuel turned his attention to the crowd. He took a deep breath. "Thank you, Eleanor," he began, his voice shaking but clear. "This mural, this is my soul. But it was born from a moment when I thought my soul had been destroyed." He reached down and lifted an object from the lectern. It was the ruined sketchbook, still warped and stained, a grotesque artifact of a past trauma. He held it up for all to see. Gasps rippled through the audience. The news cameras, sensing a dramatic turn, zoomed in on the book. 7 months ago, in this very airport, at that security checkpoint, right over there, Samuel said, pointing. My life's work was destroyed. I was on my way to a competition, a chance to change my life. And a TSA agent, in an act of casual cruelty, poured a bottle of ink over this book, destroying years of my art, my history, my memories. Supervisor Sterling's face went chalk white. The details of the dismissed complaint came flooding back to him with horrifying clarity. He stared at Samuel, then instinctively looked for Thompson, a knot of pure panic tightening in his stomach. He told me it was an accident. Samuel continued, his voice growing stronger, more powerful. He said he was following protocol. My official complaint was dismissed. I was told no misconduct had occurred. For months I believed that. I believed that my art, that my story had no value. That man with his small authority almost convinced me that I was worthless. Every eye in the crowd was now fixed on Samuel, hanging on his every word. The WBAL TV cameraman, a veteran named Dave, was a master of his craft. As Samuel spoke about the agent, Dave's instincts took over. He panned his camera across the uniformed officers, searching for a reaction. And then he saw him. Agent Thompson, pale as a ghost, sweating under the fluorescent lights, his eyes wide with a dawning, abject horror. Dave zoomed in, tightening the shot until Thompson's face filled the frame. His name tag, R. Thompson, was perfectly damningly clear. "But art is resilient," Samuel declared, his voice ringing with passion. "And so is the human spirit. They can try to silence us, to erase us, to spill ink on our souls, but they cannot destroy our truth." He gestured to the mural behind him, to the 10-foot-tall, magnificent face of his grandmother. This portrait was in that book. He tried to obliterate her, and now she stands here for everyone to see. She stands here as a witness. The feed from Dave's camera was going out live, on thousands of screens across the city. The broadcast was showing a powerful split screen on one side, the triumphant artist telling his story of injustice. On the other, the face of the agent, his guilt exposed for the world to see, a silent, damning confession. There was no hiding. There was no escape. The truth, like Samuel's art, was now 10 feet tall. The fallout was not a slow burn. It was a detonation. The moment the WBAL TV broadcast locked on to Robert Thompson's face, the physics of the event shifted. The joyous applause for Samuel and his staggering mural didn't falter. It swelled, transforming into something more ferocious. It became a roar of collective condemnation for one man and righteous vindication for the other. The sound wave hit Thompson like a physical force, pressing him back, stealing the air from his lungs. For a dizzying second, he felt utterly disconnected from his own body, a spectator watching a stranger's life implode on a massive screen. The terminal with its soaring ceilings and polished floors became a courtroom, and he was the one in the dock convicted in the incandescent court of public opinion. He could feel the heat of 1,000 eyes on him, a prickling, invasive sensation that crawled over his skin. The sea of faces in the crowd, once a blur of anonymous travelers, sharpened into individual expressions of shock, disgust, and raw contempt. He saw phones raised not in appreciation of the art, but to capture his humiliation, their small red recording lights like 100 malevolent eyes. The world had shrunk to this single suffocating point of exposure. Supervisor David Sterling, whose face had gone from chalk white to a blotchy, panicked red, moved with the predatory speed of a man seeing his pension burn. He sliced through the edge of the crowd, his movements sharp and angry, and grabbed Thompson's arm. The grip was punishingly tight. "Get to the office. Now!" He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that was somehow audible over the din. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the desperate command of a captain on a sinking ship. "Don't you dare talk to anyone!" Thompson, moving with the jerky, uncoordinated motions of a marionette whose strings had been cut, allowed himself to be steered away. The walk to the administrative offices was a gauntlet. It was no longer just glares and whispers. As the crowd parted before him, a path of shame opened up. "Bully!" A man in a business suit spat his voice, low but clear. A woman pulled her young son closer, as if Thompson were contagious, her eyes burning with scorn. He heard the anchor quote, "Shame on you," and the words struck him with the force of a slap. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, but he could not escape the forest of phones recording his every pathetic step. He stumbled into the sterile, windowless office, the door clicking shut behind him, cutting off the roar of the crowd, but offering no sanctuary. The silence within was somehow worse. It was thick with his disgrace. His phone, which he'd left on his desk, was vibrating violently, skittering across the surface like a mortally wounded insect. He stared at it, knowing it was a portal to a digital inferno he was not yet brave enough to face. The story, supercharged by the undeniable visual proof of guilt, was spreading with the terrifying velocity of a flash fire. The WBAL TV clip was ripped, edited, and reposted across every social media platform. The hashtag #TSA Thompson was not just trending. It was a global phenomenon. In Washington, D.C., frantic calls ricocheted between the TSA's National Press Office and high-level administrators. This wasn't a standard complaint they could bury in paperwork. This was a 5-alarm PR catastrophe. The footage was irrefutable, the narrative too compellingly simple. A black artist's soul, violated by a white agent's prejudice, is resurrected as a masterpiece right at the scene of the crime. Under immense pressure from media inquiries and politicians sensing a public outcry, the agency bypassed all its usual protocols. There would be no lengthy, opaque investigation. There was only the urgent need for a sacrifice. Within 3 hours, the official statement dropped. It was clinical and decisive. Agent Robert Thompson has been suspended without pay, effective immediately pending an investigation into his gross misconduct. Supervisor David Sterling has been placed on administrative leave for his role in failing to properly address the initial complaint. The bureaucracy had chosen to amputate the gangrenous limb before the infection could spread. But the hard karma that descended upon Robert Thompson was far more personal and devastating than any institutional response. He had become a meme, a villain in a national drama. He finally forced himself to look at his phone, and the screen was a torrent of hatred. His face was everywhere, paired with captions of outrage and disgust. Amateur online sleuths with chilling efficiency had found his address, his property records, even the model of his car. A news van was already parked on the street outside his modest townhouse. He was a prisoner in his own home. His personal world, already small and brittle, shattered completely. His girlfriend Sarah was in a meeting at her marketing firm when a co-worker's phone buzzed with a news alert. "Oh my God, isn't this your Rob?" the co-worker asked, turning the screen toward her. Sarah watched the clip, the magnificent mural, the artist's raw testimony, and then the sickeningly familiar face of her boyfriend, contorted in guilt. The quiet resentment she'd often dismissed, the casually racist jokes she had told herself to ignore, all crystallized into this one ugly public truth. Humiliation washed over her, hot and absolute. She walked out of the meeting, her hands shaking, and sent a single text message that would sever their past. "Don't ever contact me again." His few friends, mostly colleagues from BRWI, vanished. Calls went to voicemail. Texts were left unanswered. One finally replied, his words, blunt and self-preserving. "Man, I can't. You're toxic. Everyone is talking. I have to look out for my own job." The isolation was swift and total. His brother called from Ohio. His voice strained not just with anger, but with his own second-hand shame. "What did you do, Rob?" he pleaded. "People I work with are asking me if I'm related to that TSA agent from the news. My kids are seeing this online. What the hell did you do?" A week later, a certified letter arrived. The TSA had officially terminated his employment for a flagrant abuse of authority and actions detrimental to the mission of the agency. It was the final nail. David Sterling, in the end, was demoted to a dead-end desk job in Anchorage, Alaska, a professional exile. But for Thompson, there was no exile. There was only the cage of his new reputation. He had to sell the townhouse. His savings evaporated as he tried to find work, but the digital ghost of his actions haunted him. In a job interview for a low-level security position, the hiring manager, a kind-looking older man, smiled at his resume. Then he casually typed Thompson's name into Google. The smile vanished. The man's eyes flicked from the screen to Thompson's face, a new cold understanding in them. "I'm sorry," the manager said, his tone polite but firm. "I don't think you're going to be a good fit for us." The polite rejection felt more damning than any insult. While Thompson's world was shrinking to the four walls of a cheap anonymous apartment, Samuel Hayes's universe was expanding exponentially. His phone rang with calls from gallery owners in New York, London, and Los Angeles. The Atherton Grant Committee, in an unprecedented public statement, announced they were awarding him a special discretionary grant for artistic resilience, complete with a full-throated apology for the system that had caused him to miss the competition. He sat for an interview with a national news anchor who pressed him looking for a soundbite of vengeful triumph. "How does it feel," the anchor asked, "to know that the man who tried to destroy you has in fact been destroyed?" Samuel paused, his expression thoughtful. He refused to give the audience the simple satisfaction of gloating. "I don't feel joy in his suffering," he said, his voice calm and measured. "What he did, it came from a place of bitterness and emptiness. My hope is that this whole thing serves as a wake-up call, that it makes people think about the power they have, no matter how small and how they choose to use it. My victory isn't his failure. My victory is that mural." He glanced off camera as if he could see the painting from the studio. "My victory is that I'm still creating. Art was my answer, not revenge." He was true to his word. He used the influx of money from the commission, the grant, and the first sales of his new prints to buy a derelict corner building in his old Baltimore neighborhood. He spent months renovating it, not into a private studio, but into something for the community that had shaped him. He opened the Clarice Hayes Center, a free arts hub for local kids, a vibrant, sun-filled space stocked with paints, clay, and endless reams of paper. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after the unveiling, Samuel was watching a young girl confidently sketch a soaring dragon on an easel. He looked out the large front window onto the street. A man was walking by his shoulders, slumped in a permanent posture of defeat. He wore worn-out clothes and kept his head down, his gaze fixed on the cracks in the pavement as if afraid of meeting anyone's eyes. He looked haggard, older than his years, the angry authority replaced by a hollowed-out shame. It was Robert Thompson. He shuffled past the art center, its windows alive with color and the movement of children creating completely oblivious to the monument of his own undoing. Samuel felt a pang, not of triumph, but of a deep, sorrowful pity. The karma that had found Robert Thompson hadn't been a lightning bolt of retribution. It had been a slow, quiet, thorough dismantling and unraveling of a life by the weight of its own malice. Thompson was a ghost now, haunting the edges of a world that had moved on while inside the building named for the woman whose face he tried to erase, a new generation was learning to paint its own soul. The story of Samuel Hayes and Robert Thompson is more than just a tale of an artist and an agent. It's a stark, powerful reminder that our actions, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, ripple outwards with unseen consequences. It shows us that prejudice and the abuse of power born from bitterness can be answered not with more hate, but with something far more enduring, the defiant act of creation. Samuel didn't just get his justice, he painted it 40 feet high for the world to see, proving that the human spirit, when channeled through art, can reclaim any narrative and transform a deep wound into a beacon of hope and resilience. If you were moved by this story of justice and the incredible power of art to fight back against hate, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true-life dramas, where karma delivers its final undeniable verdict. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories.